As a young boy, and I mean a boy of 12, 13, certainly, that I encountered outside the home again, in the local grocery store, or the local drugstore, the softcore pornography, what people call softcore. And it happened in stages, gradually. It doesn't necessarily, not to me at least, happen overnight. Once you become addicted to it, and I look at this as a kind of addiction, like other kinds of addiction, I would keep looking for more potent, more explicit, more graphic kinds of material. Like an addiction, you keep craving something which is harder, something which gives you a greater sense of excitement. Again, I'm talking from personal experience, hard, real personal experience. The most damaging kinds of pornography are those that involve violence and sexual violence. Some people would say that, well, I've seen that stuff and it doesn't do anything to me. I wasn't a pervert in the sense that, people look at somebody and say, I know there's something wrong with him, and just tell. I mean, I was essentially a normal person. I had good friends. I led a normal life, except for this one small but very potent and very destructive segment of it that I kept very secret and very close to myself and didn't let anybody know about it. I'm no social scientist, and I haven't done a survey. I mean, I don't pretend that I know what John Q. Citizen thinks about this. But I've lived in prison for a long time now. And I've met a lot of men who were motivated to commit violence just like me. And without exception, every one of them was deeply involved in pornography, without question, without exception, deeply influenced and consumed by an addiction to pornography. There's no question about it. The FBI's own study on serial homicide shows that the most common interest among serial killers is pornography. And pornography can reach out and snatch a kid out of any house today. It snatched me out of my home 20, 30 years ago. And as diligent as my parents were, and they were diligent in protecting their children, and as good a Christian home as we had, and we had a wonderful Christian home, there is no protection against the kinds of influences that are loose in a society that tolerates.
My name is John Fobert. I'm a professor of higher education and student affairs at Oklahoma State University, and I also lead a national nonprofit organization called 1 in 4, which has worked since 1998 to end sexual violence on college campuses and in the military. How is pornography harming our society at large? From 2008 to 2011, exposure among kids under 13 to pornography went from 14% to 49%. Okay, just in those 3 years. Well, what's a big thing that happened? The ubiquity of the smartphone. There's no question that this generation has more access to pornography than anyone in human history ever. How do we describe to people why pornography and violence go together? Pornography is a recipe for rape. And I'm not saying that anytime someone uses pornography, they're going to commit rape. But what it essentially teaches people is that you're supposed to be violent when you're intimate with somebody. There was a study that came out of the University of Arkansas and NYU showing that 88% of scenes in porn movies include violence by one person towards another, usually a man towards a woman. But what I found most interesting about that research is that when someone hits another person in porn, 95% of the time they respond with either pleasure or they have no response at all. So it's teaching this generation that sex and violence are intertwined. The most interesting study I read most recently is one that did brain scans of men while they were watching pornography. They scanned their brains and they wanted to see what areas of the brain light up when men look at porn. It's the part of the brain that deals with objects, not people. The more we dehumanize someone, the more possible it is to commit violence against them. And that's what porn does. I study pornography as a scholar. I look at its impact. And one of the things that frustrates me is people who will say things are in the research that aren't, or they'll question solid research just because it doesn't fit their own opinion. And what they say is the connection between pornography and sexual violence is merely assumed. Well, we have over 50 studies showing a direct link between pornography and sexual violence. And from statistical odds, here's what we know. The odds that the pro-porn side who says there's no connection, the odds that they're right is like this. You take the Empire State Building in New York City, a real big building, you fill it with pennies. And then you take that and you make 1 billion Empire State Buildings filled with pennies. The odds that this pro-porn site is right is that you pick the right Empire State Building out of 1 billion of them, you go to the right floor and you pick out that right penny. That one penny represents statistically the likelihood that the pro-porn site is correct, that really there's no connection between porn and sexual violence. The odd that they're right is 1 in 1 decillion. This generation is being taught sex and violence go together. I do have hope, though, that we can unteach that. It's just we have a lot of work to do.
Now, where somebody watches their first porn is 11. Porn can be anything from like some really like softcore and like mellow to like hardcore, violent torture porn. You know, which so like for somebody to learn about sex from porn, I think is really dangerous, and I think that happens a lot. I had like a bit of like a tipping point with pop culture. I saw so much imagery in 1 week that was just like fully inspired by porn and stripper culture. And it just felt like something that we were forced to accept and we never got a chance to have a conversation about it. That message, that really homogenized, myopic message that your sex is the thing that makes you valuable. That is your currency. That limits women's choices. Like, it's across the board now with Instagram, social media, pop stars, actresses. Like, it feels like you have to be sexy to be noticed. So I think it's dangerous because we're ignoring whatever other costs there may be.
That I started garnering all of this attention from men, and I was never used to it. And I felt like unless I held on to it and kind of did what was asked of me or what was expected of me, it would go away. And after feeling what it was like, that validation and, you know, the compliments for the first time, I did not want that to go away.
You were spotted, I think, on a street. I mean, there you were a young graduate wanting to sort of find a job, and you were spotted on a street by a guy who said, I can work with you, and clearly he opened up and said it's the porn business. What was it in you that far from running away was drawn into it? That's not how it was. It wasn't just, hey, do you want to come do porn? It was more so, oh, you're beautiful. Like, would you like to do some modeling? Oh, you know, you have a great body. Like, I think you'd be great in nude modeling. Things like that. And after I came and toured the studio, you know, it was very respectable. It was a gorgeous location. It was in Miami, in Doral, Florida. It was clean. Everyone who worked there was nice. All of their cubicles were decorated with family photos. Like, it was nothing dodgy or that made me uncomfortable. And after the first time I went in wasn't the first time I filmed a porn movie. It was the second time. The first time was more so, do you want to do this? Like, sign the paperwork, et cetera, et cetera. So these guys, they just saw you, frankly, as a money machine.
Absolutely.
But you still had no advisors, you had no lawyer, you had no nothing. So
what 21-year-old has a lawyer on retainer?
I'm just trying to get my head around how stressful this must have been, and whether even now, because you sit here so poised and obviously a lot of time has passed and you've moved on, but do you think there is some sort of post-traumatic stress that is in you from this experience?
Yes, and I think it kicks in mostly when I go out in public, because the stares I get, I feel like people can see through my clothes, and it brings me deep shame. It makes me feel like I lost all right to my privacy, which I did, because I'm one Google search away.
Yeah, and those images you cannot expunge. You have no right, even though it is deeply personal to you, you have no right to remove them from anybody's view around the world.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where the pornography addiction turns into something else. You can't have something like that in your life without it growing into something else.
For years, my dirty little secret was that I was addicted to pornography. This thing has become a problem. I think it's a worldwide problem, but pornography, it really messed up my life in a lot of ways.
Hear from the co-director of the Sexual Trauma and Psychopathology program that says pornography addicts have a more difficult time recovering from their addiction than cocaine addicts, since coke users can get the drug out of their system, but pornographic images stay in the brain forever. I can remember the first time I was exposed to pornography when I was probably about 12 years old. I can see it in my head right now. Right. It's something that it won't go out of my brain, and it hurts me to know that
still remember
image,
it?
Yes, I can vividly see the photograph that I was exposed to.
Yeah.
And because of the internet, pornography is available and accessible to kids even younger. And it is such a perversion to me of what sex is supposed to be. And to have these kids so exposed to it, I think this is fantastic.
Right, sex is something we're all interested in because of biological programming, but our attitudes towards sex have become warped and perverted. Pornography reduces the spectacle of sex to a kind of extracted physical act. There's a lot of statistics here that we've got about pornography. The Journal of Adolescent Health talk about the effects of prolonged exposure to porn. I was obsessed with porn when I was a teenager, and it was nostalgic mad stuff that makes me sound old now. We had to find magazines, places, and steal things from under beds. So living in this culture now where there's just icebergs of filth floating through every house on Wi-Fi, it's inconceivable what it must be like to be a young adolescent now with this kind of access to porn. I know that pornography is wrong, but I shouldn't be looking at it. There's a general feeling, isn't there, in your core if you look at pornography that this isn't what's the best thing for me to do. This isn't the best use of my time now. I don't put that laptop lid down and think, there! What a productive piece of time spent connecting with the world. I feel like if I had total dominion over myself, I would never look at pornography again. One day at a time, I'd kick it out of my life. Pornography is not something I like. It's something that I haven't been able to make a long-term commitment to not looking at, and it's affecting my ability to relate to women, to relate to myself, my own sexuality. The direction we should be going in is how can we understand our sexuality? How can we express it lovingly? The sort of cloud of pornographic information and even soft cultural smog is making it impossible for us to relate to our own sexuality, our own psychology. So if you're constantly bombarded with great waves of filth, it's really difficult to remain connected to truth. Try to have an idea of what you want from loving relationships and what you want from sexuality.
My name is Dr. Gail Dines. I'm a Professor of Sociology and Women's Studies at Wheelock College, and I'm also founder and president of Culture Reframed, which is a non-profit that defines pornography as the public health crisis of the digital age. You know, I lecture all over the world. I lecture in colleges. What you see in the beginning is that the men, the hostility is literally coming off them. You can feel it. They're bristling with hostility towards me because they're obviously thinking, you know, what does this middle-aged feminist know about my life and about pornography? And then I start to talk, and you see their body, literally, you see their bodies change. You see the hostility kind of seep out of them because nobody before has ever explained to them what pornography does. And they are hungry for this. And at the end, they are lining up, some of them in tears, begging for help to get off pornography. Now the problem is that pornography is a kind of stealth public health crisis. I think a lot of people, especially over the age of 35, do not understand the world of young people. They do not understand what it means to grow up in a society saturated by pornography. I mean, when you look back at our sort of father's generation, or even my generation, how did boys get to pornography? They found their father's Playboy, Penthouse, and they had limited access to pornography. Now, that was sexist and bad enough as it was, But really, you look back at that today with a kind of nostalgia, because today what happens is when they put porn into Google, they get catapulted into a world of sexual violence, degradation, dehumanization. They get catapulted into a world that I think for many, they had no idea this is what they were going to get into. And I think it traumatizes them. I think it really has a terrible impact on the way they think about themselves, the way they think about sexuality, intimacy, and connection. And really, when you think about what sex is about, we call it making love. In porn, it's actually making hate. He makes hate to her. All the emotions that one links to hate, degradation, fear, violence, disgust, all of those things are what he shows towards her. So this is the introduction into the world of sex of the young boy. And so when we think about effects, when it affects the boys, then it affects the girls. And the reason for that is that the boys think the girls are going to behave like the girls and the women in pornography. And so pornography really sets you up for disappointment. Now, people who often criticize pornography are called anti-sex, to which I would argue that if you want to be pro-sex, you have to be anti-porn. You can't be pro-porn and pro-sex. You have to pick one. And I think those of us who are against pornography are against pornography because we can't stand what it does to sex. We can't stand to see the way in which it reduces sex to an industrial toxic product, which is exactly what pornography does. The free porn sites were designed as a way to get young boys into pornography. So by the time they get their credit card, they're addicted and they're using it and using it. It's a perfect business model. And I don't know what kind of adult men these boys are going to grow up into, because we have robbed them of so much by introducing them to pornography at such an early age. We have allowed the pornographers to come in and to hijack our kids' sexuality into a sexuality that is predatory, that is violent, that is disconnected, and that reduces humans to just basically sex objects, men and women. So this is why pornography is a public health crisis. It goes from the individual and radiates out to families, communities, to the culture. That is why we have to be bold, we have to be courageous, and we have to make a stand and say, not on our watch are you going to hijack our children's sexuality.